Hi, everybody, and welcome to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today is February 18th, and we're on page 49 in your magazines. Today, we're going to hear part one of a two-part article on a very, very famous and interesting book. Our title is A Search for Redemption in the Kite Runner.
This word redemption, here is a formal word if there ever was one. If you wanted a simpler synonym, you might go with forgiveness, but it feels far too simple just to say to forgive. Redemption is to save yourself from evil or sin.
To win yourself back into somebody's favor.
Yeah, your mother, you don't seek redemption when you break your mother's favorite glass. That's far too serious of a word. Redemption is something very big indeed.
So you've done something terrible, and it's probably been bothering you for a very long time, and you're going to do something really big to try and put things right as best you can. Well, so our title again, A Search for Redemption in the Kite Runner. We're going to go through it paragraph. First of all, read through the whole thing and then go back through it sentence by sentence. Afghan-American author Khaled Hosseini was born in 1965 in Kabul, Afghanistan. His family was well off, and they moved to France when Hosseini was 11 years old. The move was supposed to be temporary, but they were unable to return to Afghanistan once war broke out in their homeland. They eventually settled in the United States. When they first arrived, Hosseini couldn't speak English, and it was a shocking experience that made him feel distant from his peers. Hosseini pursued a career in medicine and worked as a doctor for more than a decade. On the side, he pursued his second love, writing. He wrote a lot about pleasant childhood memories he had as a young boy in Afghanistan. Eventually, these experiences came to heavily influence his debut novel, The Kite Runner. Readers connected with his writing, and the book became an international bestseller.
The Kite Runner is a tale of two boys from different backgrounds. Amir's father, Baba, is a wealthy man. Amir's best friend, Hassan, is the son of a servant who works for his family. However, they do have some things in common. Both boys are growing up without mothers. They also share a love of kite fighting. They even work together as a team. Hassan is a talented kite runner, and Amir has a knack for tracking kites down. One day, Amir witnesses some older boys sexually assaulting Hassan. Instead of coming to his rescue, Amir refuses to help him and runs away. This creates a rift between the boys. Eventually, Amir tells Baba that Hassan stole his money. Although he's innocent, Hassan says he's guilty. Afterwards, Hassan and his father move to another place.
This is so sad. I mean, it's really hard for me to take a story like this when you've done something you know is very wrong and that has hurt somebody else, and then you go on and tell a lie. That's really hard to live with.
And I think that reading this, especially on the face without having the context of the book in front of you, to know you're innocent of a crime and then to say you're guilty anyways, it just leaves,
wrong.
Right, it leaves a lot of questions remaining. And I think the background of this novel is one that's very pertinent today. Some of you may know that the United States is still very active in the Middle East, fighting wars, trying to stop certain factions from fighting and perhaps taking terrorism overseas. All of this goes back to the period in which the Kite Runner begins and even before World War II. In the end, none of this is terribly important for the story, but it does give you an understanding why the people are leaving Afghanistan and why there is such violence in an area that today, I mean, we almost always think of as an area that is constantly fighting.
That's right. And I've read recently that if you walk in the streets, you cannot find anything that is not full of bullet holes and pits and potholes and everything. It's just the whole country has been pretty much totally destroyed by war.
Unbelievable.
That's right. So, Afghan-American author Khaled Hosseini was born in 1965 in Kabul, Afghanistan. Now, that is where he was born, and we put it sort of in context. It is not an Arab country. They speak a language that's actually related to English. It's called Dari. So don't get that all mixed up. It's sort of like together with the Middle East, but it's not an Arab country. And as Chris said, they have been constantly at war. And there was a period when Russia stepped in and they thought that they could fix things and maybe win, but they couldn't. And that should have been a warning for the U.S. and other people to stay out. You will never win here. This is not your place, and you don't know what's going on, and you cannot control it. So I think we're still learning that lesson the hard way.
Hosseini talked about when he was a young man, when he was 11, when they left, that his family would have these parties where women were wearing short skirts and they were openly drinking and smoking. He was born into a very different world that exists there today.
Than the one that exists there today. That's right, because you see women walking around in these blue tents. They're just covered with a tent and they just have a screen over their eyes so they can see. His family was well off and they moved to France when Hosseini was 11 years old. And Chris kind of covered that already. So because of all of the violence and war and unrest there, they left and they moved to France. So well off, that means that you're not extremely, extremely rich, but you have enough to get by and some extra. You're doing quite well.
It's a good, comfortable place to be.
Next sentence, the move was supposed to be temporary, but they were unable to return to Afghanistan once war broke out in their homeland. So they went before things were really, really bad, and they thought they'd just be there until things calmed down, but they got worse. War broke out. So temporary, they thought they'd only be there a short time. They were unable to return. Please memorize this because in Taiwanese will usually say things like, oh, I cannot return, or they cannot return, and you're forgetting to use the past tense. You could say they could not return, but that is more subjective when you use can, could, shall, should, will, would. Those are more subjective. That means they're about your feeling. That's why we call them modal verbs, M-O-D-A-L, modal verbs. But if you say they were unable to return, that is very objective, not subjective. That means things made it impossible. The whole situation made it impossible for them to go back to Afghanistan. So they had to stay where they were in France. They could not go back because war had already broken out, had started in their home country, their homeland.
This was when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Hosseini's father was a diplomat and his mother was a teacher. Representing the old government and the Soviet Union moving in made it a very difficult situation for him. It would definitely not be safe for his family. And I wonder if Hosseini's father didn't make the choice not to return because he had the power to do so.
Oh, that's right. He was privileged.
Right. He had the choice. I mean, he could have gone back, but he had the choice and ability to say, my work needs to be here.
So they protected themselves in that way. They eventually settled in the United States. So their first stop was France. They stayed there a while. They realized they could not go back to Afghanistan, decided they maybe couldn't stay or didn't want to stay in France for the long term for whatever reason. So they eventually, that means after a period of trying to figure out what to do and trying different methods maybe, they decided to settle, to stay in the United States and make that their new home. When they first arrived, Hosseini couldn't speak English. And it was a shocking experience that made him feel distant from his peers. This is something that pretty much every immigrant has to go through when they move anywhere, to any country. In the U.S., it's particularly strong because we have very, very powerful pressure for people to assimilate. To assimilate, that means you become like the people around you. You must learn English. That's step number one. You have to have a culture, a lifestyle like the rest of us. If you stand out too much, you will often be made fun of. It's not that easy to make friends if you're too different. So you think that the States is a place of a lot of innovation, creativity, all this stuff. But there is so much pressure in the U.S. to conform. To conform means to be like everybody else. C-O-N-F-O-R-M. C-O-N-F-O-R-M. There is a very, very big pressure to conform in the United States. This does not just apply to immigrants, people coming from another country speaking another language. I have felt this my whole life from the time I even noticed things, like starting from 4 or 5 years old, I realized there was so much pressure to be like everybody else. There was the cool group, and if you said or did anything or wore anything different from the cool group, you would be made fun of.
Hosseini went to Southern California, to be specific, in the year 1980. So Southern California is rather famous for their kind of distinct cultural lifestyle in 1980, which in of itself had a also very strong cultural style. The long hair and the big mustaches and beards. I imagine as a 15-year-old, Hosseini must have felt very much like an outsider. And I read in an interview, I quite like his answer. The interviewer asked him if the people bullied him, and he said, no, it was even worse. They just ignored him.
That is worse. Because there's no interaction. It's like you don't exist at all.
It's almost the exact phrase he used. He says, I felt like I didn't exist. It was like I was invisible. Almost the exact words you used, Karen.
You will hear people say that hate is not the opposite of love, but being totally ignored is the opposite of love. And then a lot of people go through that. It's like you do not count. You have no hope of even getting close to being accepted by us. Just give up. We're not going to pay attention to you. And that is really, really, really the worst. So he felt distant from his peers. By peers, he's talking about the people in America of his age that he normally should make friends with and try to get along with. It was really hard. And things are still like that in the States. So don't think that things have really changed. And like I said, it's not just for immigrants. If you're from another state, you're going to try to get accepted in a new school. That is one of the really, really painful things that people will tell you about, like in their high school years. Okay, next sentence. Hosseini pursued a career in medicine and worked as a doctor for more than a decade. Now, that is something interesting, and I also observed that when I was very young. There was academic life at school, and I did fine at that. I got good grades. I was a good student. But then I also observed that there was another side of life where you're also expected to succeed, where the rules were totally different from academic success. For academic success, just study hard, do your homework, be a good kid in class, and you succeed. But with this popular culture thing, there was no way to figure out how to succeed, because if you weren't born into the right family, if you didn't have the right looks, if you didn't have the right clothes, if you didn't know how to say the right clever things, there was no way to fit in. And that is the big challenge of Western culture. You'll find it in England and other countries too, but it's really, really marked in the U.S., and it's still that way now. It's so different in Taiwan, because when I watched my kids interacting with their classmates, they helped each other. They were friendly to each other. The culture is so different. So please do not glorify or imagine that the culture in the U.S. is wonderful. Oh, I think I'll send my kid abroad. They will probably have a very hard time.
I actually know a guy that he's a teacher, and when students are like, oh, teacher, would you write me a recommendation letter to go to the United States? And he always tells them no. he will only write the recommendation letter if you're going to Canada, if you're going to England or Australia. He will not send them to the United States.
This is a toxic culture.
It is a very challenging situation for immigrants if your English is not very good.
That's right.
I will agree with that. I just think it's very funny that as an American, he refuses to write that letter for American schools.
I think a lot of us go through this very kind of contradictory set of feelings about our own country. We have a love for it. We can't help it. It's where we're from. There are many wonderful things. But if you ask anybody about what kind of experience they had in high school, get ready for a long, sad story.
Yeah, high school is kind of a bummer. I agree. College was a lot more fun.
College is great because then again, academic success means you're doing well and people have grown up by then. Right, okay. So here, although he had trouble getting along, which is so typical for almost any immigrant, he succeeded well academically and then professionally. He became a doctor. So on the side, he pursued his second love, writing.
So Hosseini was a doctor, and he would take up his love of writing, his passion for writing, before he began his very long day as a doctor. And he even had begun writing as just a medical student when you are incredibly busy, when it is normal to only get 5, maybe 6 hours of sleep on a good day.
If you're lucky.
Right. So we can tell this is quite a clever man. And I wonder, I wonder if his choice to become a doctor was not in response to what his mother and father did when they moved to California. His father was a diplomat. His mother was a teacher. However, in California, Dad became a driving instructor. Mom was a waitress at Denny's. And those are fine jobs. They took care of their child who grew up and went on to great success. But in terms of status, it was definitely a step down. I can't help but wonder, was he reacting to the situation that his mother and father faced?
They were definitely underemployed, but they certainly passed on their values and love of learning to him. And the thing that we just said in this sentence is important as well, because for people who have a lot of problems getting along socially or a lot of other issues, like maybe there's like drug abuse in the family or other problems, writing is often something that can save you because you organize your feelings, you work them out, and you find a way to deal with them. So writing is often something that many people cite as having saved them in a bad situation. He wrote a lot about pleasant childhood memories he had as a young boy in Afghanistan.
With the word pleasant, please draw a mark so we remember this EA is like bread. Please never say pleasant.
Right, pleasant. Okay, so he wrote a lot about things that happened to him when he was a boy before things really fell apart in Afghanistan. He had a sort of normal childhood. Next sentence, eventually these experiences came to heavily influence his debut novel, The Kite Runner. Now you look at the word debut, usually we say debut when it's by itself, but if we have a word after it, we'll switch the stress. So instead of he made his debut, we make it debut novel. This is a French word, and that's why we don't pronounce the T, and it means your very first novel, your debut novel.
If you have your pencil handy, draw a little X above that T so we don't forget not to say it.
Okay, and the name of the book is The Kite Runner. Next sentence, readers connected with his writing, and the book became an international bestseller.
I believe The Kite Runner spent over 100 weeks on the
New York Times bestseller list.
Over 100 weeks. And it should be said that this book became especially popular when it went into paperback. I wonder what it was that the paperback, just the price, I suppose?
Was cheaper.
Was it just that it was cheaper?
A lot of people wait because they don't want these. I don't like heavy hardback books. I like paperbacks. And also to save money, you will often wait.
Yeah, I suppose that's it. But this book, in terms of sales, exploded as a paperback.
Yeah.
Maybe the word of mouth really started at that point, too.
That could be. And another thing that's kind of weird is you have to live through this period of raw power, which starts in grade school and goes through high school in our culture in the U.S. As Chris said, when you get to the university, people start behaving better, more mature. They act decent. They don't put you down for, a bump on your nose or something like that. And at that point, you can start really developing. And the culture will respond when you produce something good because it's the grown-up culture that's responding to your good writing. And then you'll become successful. So that's why people keep coming to the States because that's where you can make it big if you've really got something.
Let's take a look at paragraph 2 here. The Kite Runner is a tale of two boys from different backgrounds.
Okay, so this is not just about him himself. We've got a couple other players who are really important, and important things happen that sort of drive the plot of the book.
Our next two sentences say, Amir's father, Baba, is a wealthy man. Amir's best friend, Hassan, is the son of a servant who works for his family.
So you can see that trouble may be coming up because there is a huge class difference between the two. They will not have equal opportunities and equal rights. Things turn out differently because of their difference in class. So there's a servant who works for the family. They are well off. That means they have enough money to hire servants. In the society, probably there are a lot of poor people, so it's easy to hire somebody for not very much money to do manual labor in your house.
In the second sentence of our story today, we use that word well off. And remember, this means you have extra money, but you're not rich. Wealthy here, we can see that Amir's father has a lot more money than, say, Hosseini's father did in real life. A servant is a person that works for another person, especially like cleaning and doing housework in this person's home.
Right, or fixing the car or cleaning the car or whatever it is.
Our next sentence says, however, they do have some things in common. Both boys are growing up without mothers. They also share a love of kite fighting.
Okay, so there are 3 sentences here. They're quite short, but they're kind of easy to handle. So there are some things that are about the same about them in spite of their class difference. So one is the son of a servant, one has a wealthy father. And one thing that they have in common is that they grew up without a mother around, and that's really hard on a kid. Having either parent gone is hard. So they don't have a mother taking care of them. They probably have servants helping out. And there's something else that they share, and that is they love kite fighting.
I think bringing different classes of people together, you'll often find that in sports and I think that and
right.
games.
And the Army.
Right. It's a great equalizer because it doesn't matter who your father is or what they did. Ultimately, when you're playing the game, when you're engaged in the sport, it's your individual effort that is most important.
And how good you get.
Right. And your teamwork.
Mm-hmm.
Should you do something better than your friend, you're able to pair up and compete on a level playing field. And it doesn't matter how much money you have in your home or where you're from. It ultimately depends on your success in the game.
So it's sort of like academics. When you're having a hard time socially, you can use academics and eventually you'll do well. And if you come from a poor family, if you're good at sports, you can also be seen as equal as other people or with other people.
Let's continue. They even work together as a team. Hassan is a talented kite runner, and Amir has a knack for tracking kites down.
So they can kind of help each other doing things that complete the task.
One day, Amir witnesses. He sees a crime. Amir witnesses some older boys sexually assaulting Hassan.
Things are going bad here. So he's getting sexually assaulted, but because he's of a lower class, he probably will not get justice.
Oh, there's a story we'll talk tomorrow.
Yep.
Oh, instead of coming to his rescue, Amir refuses to help him and runs away.
And now here the class differences come out. Amir is probably afraid. And he thinks, well, he's of a lower class. I'm not responsible. And he's also just a child, basically.
This also goes down to the differences in the tribes in their country. And this created a problem when the movie came out in 2007.
You'll have to explain that maybe more later.
Our next sentence says, this creates a rift between the boys.
Okay, a rift, that means a difference. That means they are no longer close friends because there's something between them that's creating bad feelings.
Eventually, Amir tells Baba that Hassan stole his money.
So Amir doesn't know how to deal with this. So he makes up a lie that ends up really hurting Hassan in spite of the fact that they were such good friends.
Although he's innocent, Hassan says he's guilty.
Now, why does he do that? Again, it's his class. What else can he do? If he protests, he probably still would not get justice.
Don't forget, although does not use but in English.
Yes.
Afterwards, Hassan and his father move to another place.
So this is kind of left hanging. This problem here is not resolved. Hassan has been wronged and he was not given justice. And that's where we stop for today. And if you feel it's left hanging, it has on purpose. We will continue it tomorrow. Make sure you tune in then when we'll tell you the rest of the story of Hassan and Amir. We'll see you tomorrow.